Hi, welcome back to Teaching Them. I'm Michael Keentz, and I have a lesson for you today called Would You Die for a Lie? Would you die for a lie? This lesson is a defense of Jesus' divinity in the gospel by showing that the apostles believed it so much they were willing to die for it. They didn't die for a lie, they died for the truth. This lesson is a slideshow that you can show the kids, and it shows a map of the area where all the apostles traveled to, and then it also tells how they died. Now, there are a lot of gory details in how the apostles died, so you'll want to use discretion as to how much of that you share with the kids. You can just tell them, and this apostle was killed for his beliefs. You don't have to tell them how. And also another note is that a lot of the information about the apostles is not in the Bible. There are just a couple. We know about James, we know about Judas in the Bible. We know a little bit about Peter, but we don't know a whole lot of what actually happened to him. So a lot of what we have is from historians and other sources, and some of it is legend, and it's hard to prove or disprove. So I've been generous in the way that I've handled this, and generous with where they traveled. And if there was a source that said they traveled to this space, I went ahead and included it. And then in terms of how they died, I went through and I told multiple ways they might have died based on the different evidence that we have. This lesson is an important one to show kids how true the gospel is. You would not have had 12 men go out and die for no reason. They died for what they firmly believed in their hearts. And I hope that it'll be a good tool for you to really impress upon the kids the truth of the gospel and the truth of Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. Do you ever wonder what happened to the 12 apostles who followed Jesus? Apostles is a term that means messengers, and these were the people that Jesus trusted to tell others about him. Well, the Bible only tells us about a few of them. Most of what we know comes from historians and others who wrote about the time of Jesus and the beginning of the Christian church. So here's what we know. It all started on this tiny piece of land over here called Israel. Can you believe how small that is? Africa's over here. Look how big that is. This is Saudi Arabia over here. We have Turkey, and we have Europe over here. But this is a little piece of land that was very important. Jesus trained 12 apostles to take the good news, which is the gospel, to all the world. And the apostles took their job very seriously, as you'll see. Let's start off with Judas Iscariot. So Judas Iscariot was the apostle that betrayed Jesus. He went and he took 30 pieces of silver and he sold Jesus, and then he brought the Roman guards and the temple guards to Jesus in the garden so that they could arrest him. Out of all the apostles, he's the only one who didn't die for his faith. But he did die. He committed suicide by hanging himself from a tree. Then we have James. James was the first apostle to get martyred. He was a son of thunder and one of Jesus' closest friends on earth. But he became the first apostle to die for his belief. And a martyr is someone who dies for what they believe. Herod Agrippa I, who was the king of Judea, had him arrested. And then when he saw that the Jewish leaders hated James, he had him beheaded. This made Herod so popular that he tried to do the same thing with Peter, and he arrested him and had him in jail. But an angel came in the middle of the night and freed Peter. So James didn't travel to any other places. He only ministered in Israel. Then the next one that we have is Andrew. Andrew was an apostle who was always bringing people to Jesus. He brought Peter to Jesus. He brought a young boy with loaves and fishes. He brought some Greeks to Jesus. And he was a brother of Peter, as we'll see here in a little bit. After Jesus rose to heaven, Andrew took the gospel into modern-day Turkey, Greece, Romania, Ukraine, and Russia. He angered a Roman governor by leading his wife to Christ, and he was crucified in Greece on an X-shaped cross. Instead of nailing him to the cross, they tied him to it so that it would take longer for him to die. Then we have Philip. And the Bible tells us that Philip doubted that Jesus could feed the 5,000. But after Jesus rose from the dead, Philip no longer had any doubts. He took the gospel to modern day Turkey, Greece, Syria, and Tunisia in the African continent. He led the wife of a Roman official to Jesus, and the official was so angry that he had Philip stoned to death at Hierapolis in modern day Turkey. The next one is Bartholomew. Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, he went lots of places, all the blue places. He preached about Jesus in modern day Turkey, Armenia, and Iran, and then he went all the way down to Yemen at the south part of Saudi Arabia and to Ethiopia, and he even went to India. Tradition says that he was either tied up in a sack and thrown into the sea or whipped until he was flayed alive. Then we have Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector before he met Jesus, and he was one of the most hated people by the Jews. They didn't like the tax collectors taking their money, and they suspected them of always stealing money from them. And so he was very unpopular, but Jesus brought him onto his team. And he was the one who wrote the gospel for the Jewish people, the Gospel of Matthew. We don't have reliable records about Matthew, but we think he preached in modern day Macedonia, Syria, Iran, and Ethiopia. And we know he was killed for his faith, but we're not exactly sure how. Some say he was stabbed, some say crucified and burned, and some say he was killed with an axe. Then we have Thomas. Thomas was the apostle that doubted Jesus had risen from the dead. And he said he wouldn't believe until he could put his finger into the nail scars in Jesus' hands. Jesus graciously appeared to him and invited him to do just that, to put his finger in the nail scars and in his side where he had been stabbed with a spear. And Thomas fell to his knees and he said, "My Lord and my God." Thomas went on to preach the gospel in modern day Iran, Iraq, and India. He died when 4 soldiers attacked him with spears. Then we have James the Less. Now, he's probably called James the Less because he's either younger or shorter than the other James, or maybe because he came after James did, the first James that was martyred. We think that he took the gospel to Syria, Iran, and Egypt, and the historian Josephus recorded that he was stoned and clubbed to death. Then we have Simon the Zealot. A zealot, it was someone, a political party that attacked tax collectors and the Romans, and they were very zealous. That's where the zealot term comes from. They were very zealous for their faith. But once he came to follow Jesus, his heart was totally changed. He took the gospel to modern day Armenia and Iran, and then to Egypt and Libya. And some say he went as far as modern day Britain up there in the top left corner. He was killed for his beliefs. We aren't exactly sure how. Some say crucified, some say beheaded, and some even say he was sawn in half. Then we have Thaddeus. Thaddeus had 3 names, so he was called Thaddeus, Judas, and Jude, and sometimes they called him Trinomius, which means 3 names. So Thaddeus, his name means courageous heart. He really showed that in his life. He preached the gospel in modern-day Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Armenia. And he once healed the king of the city of Edessa. Edessa's in Turkey. Most say he was clubbed to death in Lebanon, but some say he was crucified, and some say he was shot with arrows. Then we have Peter, Peter the Rock. His name was originally Simon, but Jesus renamed him Peter and said, "On this rock I'll build my church." He was Andrew's brother, and he had a dramatic transformation after he denied Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus was arrested. On the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came on the believers, and Peter got up and preached and led 3,000 people to the Lord. He was so powerful spiritually that people were healed when just his shadow fell on them. He raised a woman named Dorcas from the dead, and then he led the first non-Jewish people to Jesus. Peter wrote a couple of books in the Bible, or they're really letters that we have in the Bible, and many people think that he might have helped Mark to write the Gospel of Mark. He preached about Jesus throughout modern-day Turkey and eventually went to Rome, Italy, where he witnessed to the Roman Emperor Nero. Peter and his wife were both crucified by Nero for their beliefs, but Peter begged to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to die in the same way that Jesus did. Then we have John. Now, John is unusual. John is the only apostle who did not die for his faith other than Judas. John was one of the other sons of thunder. He was the brother of James. He too was one of Jesus's closest friends on earth. He lived many years, but it had to be sad for him because all his friends were getting killed. John was one time boiled in oil, but he escaped without being hurt. The Roman Emperor Domitian got angry with him and sent him to live on an island where prisoners were exiled. It was the island of Patmos off the coast of Turkey. He had to live in a cave while he was there, but that is where he wrote the book of Revelation that we have in the Bible. And during his lifetime, he also wrote the Gospel of John, and we have 3 of his letters that made it into the Bible. In his later years, John pastored a church in the city of Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, and there he died of old age. Now, there were 2 more apostles who were appointed to be apostles after Jesus had risen from the dead. And the first one is Matthias. Matthias had been chosen to replace Judas, who had killed himself, and they did it by casting lots, which is kind of like drawing straws, in order for God to show him who should we choose. He became an apostle, and he became very faithful. He preached about Jesus in modern-day Turkey, Macedonia, and Georgia, and some also say he preached all along the shore of the Caspian Sea up there in the top right. He was killed for his beliefs either by being burned or by being stoned and then beheaded. Then the final apostle was Paul. Paul was actually an enemy of Jesus at first. He hunted down and arrested Christians until he met Jesus while he was traveling on the road to Damascus. After giving his life to Jesus, Paul spent the rest of his life traveling and sharing the gospel with as many people as possible. He also established many churches in the places he visited. He went to modern-day Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Macedonia, Greece, and the islands of Sicily and Crete. And during his travels, he was stoned. He was beaten with rods 3 times, and he was shipwrecked 3 times. Then he was arrested, and he was taken all the way to Rome. But along the way, he preached the gospel to kings. When he got to Rome, he was in prison for a long time. And some people think that he got out of prison and that he went to Spain because he had written that he wanted to go to Spain. But then they think he was rearrested, and at that time he was beheaded by the Emperor Nero. So that's what became of all the apostles. John was exiled, Judas killed himself, and the other 12 were put to death because they claimed that Jesus is God. Don't worry, though. God doesn't ask everyone to die for their faith. The apostles were so powerful in sharing the gospel that God's enemy, the devil, fought very hard against them. God protected each of them for a long time, but then there came a time in each of their lives that they completed the work that God had given them to do. When it came that time, they each decided that they wanted to give God as much glory as they could when they died. By dying for their beliefs in Jesus, they showed the world that they were convinced that Jesus is really God. So let me ask you a question. If you told a lie and someone powerful said that you either had to admit you were lying or that they wouldn't kill you, what would you do? You wouldn't die for a lie, would you? Touch your neighbor and say, I wouldn't die for a lie. No, just like me, you would admit that you had lied so you could go on living. Well, the people who killed these men accused them of lying about Jesus. They demanded that the apostles admit that they were lying about Jesus being God, or else they would be put to death. But these men chose to let people kill them rather than say they were lying about Jesus. Why do you think that was? Right. They weren't lying. These men didn't die for a lie. Nobody's dumb enough to do that. They died for the truth. Touch your neighbor and say, they died for the truth. They let themselves be put to death because they knew that death was not the end of their story. They knew it was just the beginning. They knew that death was just the end of this physical life here on earth, and they were looking ahead to what Jesus had promised them, eternal life with him in heaven. Probably none of us will have to die for the truth that Jesus is alive and Lord of all creation. But there are so many people out there who don't know the truth. We've got to be like the apostles, and we got to tell those people about Jesus. Don't let them die believing a lie. Tell them the truth. Jesus is alive. He loves them. And if they will follow him, they can live with him forever in heaven. All right, I've got a rhyme time to help us remember what this story is about. The apostles died, but we don't grieve. They gave their lives so we'd believe. The apostles died, but we don't grieve. They gave their lives so we'd believe. Great. So there's the lesson. If you want to print out the lesson and get the slideshow, you can do that at teachingthem.org. And I hope you'll use it. I hope that it will bless you. Please leave me some comments. Let me know how it goes. God bless you. I'll see you next time.